satin on certain.
Okay, this is my postcard exhibition, and it doesn't show the history of the postcard, it shows the history of my postcards. It's not in any chronological order, it doesn't show you a historical development. It shows you the fact that I can't resist the small card oblong which opens up its own little universe. In the exhibition, every frame, and there are 26 of them, has a theme. But this one is the door into my mind, because it's just curator's choice. There is no theme at all. These are cards I don't think anyone should be able to resist, because they all have their own interior logic. An image of a skyscraper with glitter added. A smoking doll, but with the outside removed, so we've got an interior. This one is the card you used to buy if you went to our Museum of Antiquities, now long gone. It wasn't a card of any of the antiquities. It showed the gentleman who was the director of the museum, who was already gone by the time I bought the card. All of them show a little world that someone thought was worth putting onto a postcard, and in theory someone thought was worth their friend receiving. Some of these have been sent. The adorable illustration of guinea pigs in Jane Austen costume in a scene of country courtship. Similarly, Christian greetings from Filey Holiday Crusade. The ideal postcard, I think, doesn't necessarily show you a place that you wish you'd been. It shows you a place you're very, very glad you avoided. This is the most straightforward part of the exhibition. It's Postcards of Newcastle. And some of them are quite straightforward, as I say, but they do show that the postcard can be a snapshot of the past, not necessarily the distant past. Some of them show things that we were very, very proud of in the 70s that we've now subtly changed. Some of them are things that are still there, but we no longer do postcards. For example, our civic centre doesn't seem to have quite the same appeal as it used to. This, of all my local postcards, is my favourite though. This is one of the war memorials in Newcastle. We've got several remarkably fine ones. This is actually commemorating the South African War. And this postcard, which shows that memorial, which is still there, on the day it became official, on the day it was opened. So you've got a sea of people. And it's that combination of something which is still in the same place, which commemorates something still gone, but which is about a very particular moment. It's about the fashions of that moment. It's about being there at that moment. And I don't particularly collect location postcards, but that strikes me as summing up all that is best and most evanescent and intangible about them. The monument is tangible, but the moment is gone, but I have the postcard. These are the ones that many people think are the strangest. I've always found it almost instinctively natural to collect postcards of human remains. After all, someone's got to do it. Also, I'm a Fortean. I write for the Fortean Times. I believe that examining those weird things that don't quite fit into categories is very, very important. It's part of being a human being. And these are my strange postcards. These are just oddities. We've got a stuffed two-headed calf, or to be more precise, we've got its head, its conjoined head from Hereford. We've got a hand of glory from Whitby. We've got the fairy coffins from Edinburgh. We've got images that are about ghosts, about death, about the afterlife. The Yeti is part of a cultural, educational exhibition about monsters, and he was a huge animatronic model of a Yeti, and this postcard's very precious because it shows him as brown, which is what most of the descriptions of the Yeti say. And by the time the exhibition had finished touring, they'd had to change the model to white because the public conception was that the Yeti was white in the snow. So that's actually a little tiny monument to the way that belief overcomes documentation. Waxworks are intrinsically weird. There's this term, the uncanny valley, which means that area where you look at something that almost looks as if it's alive and it isn't quite. And that's always slightly dodgy. So here we've got a collection of waxworks, some of them very good. There's a wonderful one of Queen Victoria from Madame Tussauds, although she's not in the museum, she's actually being pushed along. And and some of them are really, really very, very bad. We've got a magnificent one from Louis Tussaud's waxworks, which is not quite the same thing, of can-can dancers. The miner flashing his backside is from Woodhorn Colliery Museum. And we've got a fine one of George Bernard Shaw on a tricycle against what appears to be a sort of alien growth and all lit with a purple light. And that's what the postcard should be about. These are the human remains. People come up to this frame and say they're going to rush past it and then they don't, which I find fascinating. There are lots of human remains that are now tourist attractions, so of course they've engendered postcards. We've got the casts of corpses from Pompeii. We've got various South Italian corpses that were naturally desiccated. We've got the wonderful so-called mummies of St Michan's in Dublin. These are great because in theory you shouldn't, but the guide always turns around and says you can. You crawl in and you're allowed to touch them. And I have shaken hands with these mummies. And we've got some plastination images from the work of Gunther von Hagen. And it happens, I found out yesterday, that Newcastle's going to have a Gunther von Hagen exhibition. So I'm really crossing my fingers that it comes complete with postcards. I love the exhibits, but I love them best if I can take away the postcard. Postcards about postcards. They're about the fact that it isn't always, even in the early days, about just pointing a camera at something interesting. Postcards are manipulated, they create their own internal logic. These are all collaged, and this is before digital technology makes it something we can all do without a second thought. Some of them are very obviously collaged, that's the joke. No one really believes there are rabbits that size even in Australia. Some of them are collaged for effect, for sentimental effect, the little girl bursting out of the rose. You could even get your own home photographs done in a similar way. I'm not sure how reassuring I find the image of the soldier bursting out of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, but it is an example of this kind of arrangement. But some of them it's less obvious. This is a nice picture of two Highland cows in a Highland scene. If you look at the one above, although it's got a Highland scene and a banner which is in tartan, and it says from Scotland, it obviously wasn't sufficiently Scottish. So those two cows were cut out and collaged into that one. In this one, we've actually got the same lion twice. It takes someone like me to sit and examine postcards endlessly, perhaps to pick up on these subtle nuance. These horrendous things were very popular. You can see I've got 3 variations, and they were multiple baby postcards. You imagine the problem of just photographing one baby. These have got dozens or so they were carefully collaged, and they're all very funny. Babies are in fact a leaf crop, according to this, which probably solved the problem of telling young children the facts of life. This is about words on postcards. I have to say with some sorrow that this one, intoxicating liquor, man's invention, is not even remotely ironic, which is a shame. It is in fact warning you about the demon drink. Some of them, although old, feel very modern. Keep smiling though the skies are grey and look upon the bright side. But if no bright side you can see, then polish up the dark side. Sounds as if it has to be a Star Wars reference, but no, it's the fact that what goes around comes around. This category has become very popular in recent years, with people vying to find good examples, the boring postcard. The idea is that when these were made, presumably no one thought they were boring. It's just looking at them, you think, why did you consider the inside of a shopping centre or an airport would be particularly interesting? So they tend not to be picturesque, and the best ones show boring sights in boring ways, which is even better. Some of these could make quite nice postcards, but you have to pause and ask why. The Middlesbrough shopping centre is a favourite because I've often walked along there. And we've got, this one is apparently a country town or village. It could have been interesting closer up, but the camera's drawn a long way back, so we focus on a puddle, which is the essence of the boring postcard. Turning around, this is the opposite. This is what people thought of as intrinsically attractive. It's down to your taste. They are cute kids. And we still get lots of postcards of amusing, attractive children, but it was a major theme in the late Victorian and early 20th century postcard. And to us they are perhaps a teensy bit sickly, the notion being that children are beautiful and amusing, carefully posed to conceal their naturally demonic character. So children pretend to court each other, little girls gaze upwards with heavenly glances, small babies in nappies extol the virtues of seaside resorts. This one has a very worrying, eerie glow. I know they're supposed to be looking into a fireplace, but for me it's children like Nero watching while Rome burns. There's a kind of sinister aspect to some of these. Political postcards. This has got the leaders of the Conservative, the Liberal and the Labour parties all about to take poppy wreaths to the cenotaph. So presumably you could send that to a friend of any political affiliation. Bill Clinton, for some reason, is slightly tinselly. I'm not too sure about that. This is also, I suppose, in some ways slightly political, but it's the politics of change, because this is about things that are gone. These are postcards which show things that probably at the time people thought would be around for a very long time, but which aren't. Some of them are merely transient moments. This one, I have no idea what it shows. It's a municipal ceremony of some kind. It was obviously happening one day and now it's gone. But some of them, such as the ride on a Spanish city in Whitley Bay, I guess people thought that would be around for much longer than it was. The skyscraper here, the Derwent Tower, Dunstan, otherwise known as the Dunstan Rocket. I think there was a cheer when that one went. Sometimes they're people. Whitney Houston's gone, Margaret Thatcher went, conveniently close to the opening of this exhibition, so I could put her in. We don't use those bath chairs, thank God we don't use dog carts anymore. And we no longer have the giant pencils. The giant pencils, for me, that card is about memory, because I can remember when everyone was so proud in Newcastle of our spiffy, shiny shopping centre, and it had this wonderful sculpture of gigantic pencils, and then quietly, without a word, suddenly it wasn't there. And I don't remember when it ceased to be there, but I'm very glad that I bought the postcard while we were still proud of it. As with the glamour ones, the comic postcards we did exercise a bit of tact over, and the one criticism I've had of the show from several people is there aren't enough saucy seaside postcards. Modern saucy seaside postcards go beyond saucy, and I didn't want to risk offending, and also I don't always think they're funny, so I've gone for things I thought were visually amusing, and I've gone for vintage ones. The jokes are not particularly subtle, but often they're great to look at. Lovely period pieces like this sort of Bertie Wooster type. Sometimes, however, the jokes remain pretty much constant. I have modern variants of this one, which is the girl engaging in a sport that's showing off rather more than she thinks it is. Aren't I displaying my agility? Well, not quite, but very nearly. The joke remains the same. This is interesting in that it only works if you have all three cards. It's an expectant father receiving his baby, and then there's a second, and then there's a third. And so obviously the idea was you had to send someone all three cards. Even more amazing is that I found all three cards. I've got the set. Otherwise, some of these are, of course, about gender issues. In the beginning, woman gave man an apple, now she gives him a pear. Not a reference to bosoms, but twins. But some of them are about surprising things. Allotments. It's amazing how often vegetables turn up on postcards, and I was narrowly dissuaded from having several vegetable frames. Now, because they were cheaper to send than something in an envelope, for a long time, birthday, Christmas, Easter cards were often sent as postcards that just could go straight through the post, and some of them are very strange. You do have to pause and wonder. A Merry Christmas has a particularly disapproving black and white image of an adult Jesus who looks as if he really has no time for the holly that's being shown. Easter ones usually have chicks on. The chicks who are hatching from the insulators on a telegraph pole have amused many people. For your birthday, you could have almost anything. There is an inset image of dogs next to a big red tulip. I don't know why. Obviously, any birthday that came with pictures of Gladys Cooper was bound to be enhanced. How could it not be? Some of them, you can see, have obviously been issued for one purpose and adapted for another by the publisher. This Cupid's Darts has a couple of children embracing, it's got cupids, it's in a heart, it's obviously a Valentine's card, but when you look at the scroll, it says Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, so it's obviously been overprinted for reuse. This one is the saddest, and also it's from the golden age of the postcard, the period of the First World War. The postcard was a preferred, almost officially accepted form of communication for those who were on active service. Sackloads and sackloads of postcards were sent from soldiers, and again they were often kept because you kept them because you were so pleased that your loved one had come back, or you kept them because they hadn't. And the kinds of imagery are pretty much what you'd expect. There are patriotic posed images of allegories of the various countries. There are images of action, images of things actually being mostly blown up, I have to say. And there are many, many images expressing regret that someone is no longer with you and hope that you will see them again, either a father or a lover. This one, I've just been told, shows one of the first settlers that was brought down during the First World War. It just looks like an abstract composition, but apparently that is what it shows. This one is one of the few cards where I've put on the back. It says on the back, quite roughly scrawled, and you must remember in the trenches people wouldn't have had pen and ink, so these are mostly written with crayon or pencil. It says, on active service, and I might mean it. Christmas 1914 from Jim, which is really very potent. This is the oldest one. The Filbert of the Canuts, this will fetch 'em. The minute I saw this, I knew what it was a reference to. It was a reference to a very popular song called I'm Gilbert the Filbert, the Nut with a K, which was sung by Basil Hallam in a review in 1914. And it became very popular because it was just the moment when people were beginning to go out on active service at the beginning of the First World War, and a lot of the men regarded it almost as their anthem. So being a Canut, which in the original context meant being a bit of a flaneur, a bit of a sort of Bertie Wooster character, became a rallying cry for the lads in their various groupings. Now the man who sang it, Basil Hallam, usually appeared in elegant evening dress on stage, but unusually in this card he's in military costume, so I'm pretty sure this was specially done as a recruitment postcard. The sad thing is that Basil Hallam signed up himself and was killed in 1916. He was actually, he was in an observation balloon, and he was wearing a parachute, which was unusual in the war, but those in the observation manoeuvres did have them. And it obviously wasn't very effective because he slipped out of the harness of it and died. And this case was inspired by a very recent, very odd find. I found 3 postcards which show a very boring scenes of classrooms in a lycée in Arras. And I bought them because they were magically boring, that was the whole point. And when I got them home and turned them over, they've been written, not as though they were going to be sent, but they've been written in pencil all the way along, and they're numbered 66, 67 and 68. And there's someone's first-hand account of being in Arras as part, as far as I can see, of a military hospital group during the First World War. I went back to the market where I bought these the following week in the hope that they would have numbers 1 to 65 of the account, but of course they didn't. So I only have these 3, and it stops in the middle of this one. So under what circumstances they were written, I have no idea. If they were ever sent, they were sent in an envelope, and it's just a tiny fragment of someone's account of the war. This is more cards I couldn't leave out, cards I couldn't categorise. It's got trolls, so it has to be good. It's got Norwegian trolls, which are obviously meant to attract people for holidays in Norway, but it's also got the kind of trolls that we used to collect. And these little plastic ones on a sort of plaster of Paris wave. I remember buying that card from a local Society for the Propagation of Christian Knowledge bookshop, which I think stresses the way that postcards breach any sort of cultural boundaries. I love the shape of the postcard. I've managed to get the late Princess Diana's head and a whelk, which is a nice juxtaposition. I would like to mention the dog against the blue background. I think this was a vanity card. I think someone did the painting and had a card produced and then didn't know what to do with them. And I asked my darling students if they would bring in any postcards they didn't want so I could give people free postcards in this exhibition. And one of them, bless her, went to a charity shop and bought 93 copies of that card. She has a wonderful, extremely warm sense of humour, so anyone can apply to me for a free copy of Knowing Dachshund Against Blue Background, and I will be very happy to send them one.
Really?
Another one, he was on Saturday, on Sunday. No, I'm not saying.